Is the woman convicted of trafficking teenage girls for Jeffrey Epstein cutting a secret deal to get out of jail free? Is the president dangling a pardon to someone who can help him get out of a never-ending bad news cycle? And who exactly does the Justice Department work for these days? Ghislaine Maxwell, who is currently serving a 20-year sentence in federal prison in Florida, just spent 2 days huddled up with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. You might remember Blanche as Donald Trump's former criminal defense lawyer. Now he's the second in command at the Justice Department, and Trump has given him a special assignment: solve the Jeffrey Epstein problem. As Devin explained back in 2022, the allegations against Maxwell and Epstein were horrifying. Underage victims said Maxwell gained their trust, transported them to Epstein properties around the world, and then groomed them to participate in sex acts with Epstein. They said he used hidden cameras to record the abuse. One survivor said Epstein recruited her when she was a 15-year-old spa attendant working at Trump's Florida country club Mar-a-Lago. The president has floated at least 3 different stories as to why he cut ties with Epstein in the early 90s. Maybe Epstein competed with him on a real estate deal. Maybe he behaved inappropriately toward a girl at the club. Maybe Epstein poached staff. That's the latest one.
People were taken out of the spa, hired by him. In other words, gone. And other people would come and complain, this guy is taking people from the spa. I didn't know that. And then when I heard about it, I told him, I said, listen, we don't want you taking our people, whether it was spa or not spa. I don't want him taking people. And he was fine. And then not too long after that, he did it again. And I said, out of here.
But before that, Trump and Melania regularly socialized with Epstein and Maxwell. And for some reason, ever since she was arrested, Trump just can't bring himself to condemn her.
I just wish her well, frankly. I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach. But I wish her well.
All of this is taking place against a backdrop of rising outrage among Trump's base. Because for years, Trump and his allies promised that they would reveal the truth about Epstein, including men who participated in abuse with him. They also claimed, without evidence, that Epstein was murdered in his jail cell.
What the hell are the House Republicans doing? They have the majority. You can't get the list? Put on your big boy pants and let us know who the pedophiles are.
Now that podcasters Kash Patel and Dan Bongino are running the FBI, they've changed their tune. They say there's no Epstein client list to release and insist that he died by suicide. And on top of all that, Trump is now suing the Wall Street Journal for reporting that the president contributed a lewd drawing to a book of well wishes to celebrate Epstein's 50th birthday. And now the woman who compiled that birthday book and helped run an infamous sex trafficking ring is talking to the Justice Department. And those meetings with Blanche raise serious legal and ethical questions. Could the Trump administration offer Maxwell a pardon or a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation? Could Maxwell lie to protect Trump and punish his enemies? And if she does, is there anything that can stop her? Ghislaine Maxwell is an Oxford-educated socialite who grew up surrounded by wealth and power. Maxwell's father was a British media mogul named Robert Maxwell, who owned several British newspapers, including the Daily Mirror. In 1991, Robert Maxwell fell off his yacht, christened the Lady Ghislaine, and drowned under mysterious circumstances. After his death, it emerged that Robert Maxwell had embezzled hundreds of millions of pounds from his company's pension funds. His empire crumbled, and the Maxwell name became synonymous with fraud. But Ghislaine moved to the United States and reinvented herself with the help of her new boyfriend, financier Jeffrey Epstein. The source of Epstein's wealth has been an enduring mystery. He began his career as a teacher at a prestigious Manhattan prep school, despite lacking a college degree. He was hired by the school's headmaster, Donald Barr, the father of future Trump Attorney General William Barr, because there are only 25 people in all of New York, I guess. Epstein later became a trader at the investment bank Bear Stearns, and after just 4 years made partner. Eventually, he established his own financial operation, claiming that he only would manage money for billionaires, which could be true, I don't know. What is true is that Epstein lived extravagantly. He owned a private island, multiple luxury homes, and 2 private jets. His philanthropic foundation made headlines, but was later revealed to be a tool for image management and tax avoidance, especially after his 2005 arrest in Florida for sexually abusing underage girls. One accuser told the Miami Herald that Epstein was preying on 14-year-old girls who were basically homeless. Another accuser said he tried to rape her. Despite credible accusations from dozens of survivors, Epstein was allowed to plead guilty in 2008 to soliciting a minor for prostitution instead of serial sexual abuse of children. Epstein's all-star legal team, including famous Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz and former special counsel Ken Starr, negotiated the deal with the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, Alex Acosta. Epstein served just 13 months, sleeping in jail at night and free to spend his days out on work release. One of his victims alleged in a lawsuit that he continued to prey on young girls even when he was nominally in criminal custody. Epstein was never really able to rehabilitate his image, but after serving his sentence, he did return to something like his old life. He certainly had enough money. But in 2018, reporter Julie Brown of the Miami Herald wrote a devastating series of articles about Epstein's crimes and the rotten plea deal from 10 years before. By then, Alex Acosta was serving as Trump's Secretary of Labor, although he was forced to resign amid public outrage in 2019 when Epstein was re-indicted in New York on sex trafficking charges. Later that year, Epstein died in his jail cell. His estate paid more than $171 million to over 150 women who accused him of abuse. So what does Ghislaine Maxwell have to do with all this? A lot. Maxwell was a constant presence in Epstein's orbit long after their romantic relationship ended. Prosecutors said that she was not merely his confidant or his assistant, but his partner in crime. Maxwell trawled shopping malls, trailer parks, and even a summer camp looking for vulnerable young girls to exploit. She groomed them by posing as a mentor or maternal figure, and she took them shopping and invited them to luxurious estates and convinced them that they were safe. And then she introduced them to Epstein, where the abuse began. Maxwell often participated in their exploitation. During her trial, witnesses testified that between 1994 and 2004, Maxwell helped Epstein lure girls to homes in New York, Florida, New Mexico, and England. Victims testified that Maxwell was present during massages that turned sexual. Prosecutors described her as a sophisticated predator who trapped girls in cycles of abuse. In June of 2020, Maxwell was indicted for sex trafficking, transporting minors across state lines, and multiple conspiracy counts. During her trial, 4 women testified that Maxwell groomed them as teenagers. One said that she was just 14 when Maxwell approached her at an arts camp in Michigan. Another testified that she visited Epstein's Florida home over 100 times between 2001 and 2004, often leaving with $300 in cash placed on the bathroom sink. She said that Maxwell once touched her and commented that she had a great body for Epstein and his friends. Prosecutors also introduced financial records showing Epstein transferred over $30 million to Maxwell. In her closing argument, Assistant U.S. Attorney Allison Moe described the payments as "we molested kids together" money. The jury convicted Maxwell on 5 of 6 counts, including sex trafficking a minor, transporting a minor across state lines, and 3 conspiracy charges related to grooming and transporting minors. She was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, which she's currently serving in Florida. The sentence was a significant victory for survivors of sexual abuse, but it left many unanswered questions, such as what did Maxwell know about Epstein's finances? Is there video or photographic evidence about other people who were involved in abuse? Were other people complicit, and will they ever be held accountable? Some of these questions could be answered by Epstein's victims who were cut out of the long-ago plea deal in Florida, despite explicit promises from prosecutors to keep them in the loop. But that's not who Blanche is talking to. Instead, he's talking to Maxwell alone, and that is deeply problematic because that gives Maxwell all the bargaining chips she could ever hope for in securing a presidential pardon or a sweetheart deal from the DOJ. All she has to do is tell Blanche whatever Trump wants to hear. On the other hand, on Monday, July 28th, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, one of Trump's most rabid lapdogs, snapped back at the hand that feeds him, urging the president to back down from doing any kind of deal with Maxwell.
So it's particularly interesting to see how the media is covering all of this, because when the news broke that Trump's DOJ intended to meet with Maxwell, over 392 news sources reported on it, with about 25% coming from the left, 45% from the center, and 25% from the right. But when you examine the headlines, you see very different frames emerge that shape how readers interpret and understand the events as they unfold. On the left, a common theme is to describe the DOJ's actions as reaching out to Maxwell, suggesting a type of friendly coordination. In contrast, nearly every headline on the right uses the term interview, implying a neutral, fact-finding approach. Though center-leaning coverage remained largely factual and neutral, center sources were just as likely as the left to frame the story within the context of the larger Epstein drama facing Trump, suggesting the meeting with Maxwell as politically motivated. The headlines you read first have immense power to shape how you understand the news, and that's why I like to see the news from as many angles as I can with the help of today's sponsor, Ground News. And right now, they're offering LegalEagle viewers 40% off their unlimited access Vantage subscription. Scan the QR code or use the link in the description to get the discount for a limited time. Ground News gathers related articles from around the world and across the political spectrum so you can see the bias and compare coverage. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. And they just added a feature that covers podcasts on major stories. I also love their blind spot feature, which shows you stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum, like the story that just broke of Joe Rogan condemning the Trump administration for gaslighting their supporters on Epstein. That story was entirely ignored by right-leaning media, with 75% of coverage on the left and 25% on the center, suggesting coverage was largely partisan-driven. Ground News is my favorite way to get the news, and as a legal eaglet, you can save 40% off the Ground News Vantage subscription by scanning the code on screen or clicking on the link down below. The subscription gives you unlimited access to every feature, including the Bias Insight tool and the Blind Spot feed. By subscribing, you'll support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent and balanced. So click the link below or scan the code today, or we will see you in court. Back in 2021, Maxwell's indictment included 2 counts of perjury for false statements made during a 2016 deposition in a civil lawsuit brought by Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's victims. She accused Epstein and Britain's Prince Andrew of rape. Under oath, Maxwell denied knowing that Epstein had engaged in sexual abuse and denied any involvement herself. When asked whether Jeffrey Epstein had a scheme to recruit underage girls for massages, she said, "I don't know what you're talking about." When she was asked to name every person under age 18 whom she interacted with at Epstein's property, she said, "I'm not aware of anybody that I interacted with other than, obviously, the plaintiff, who was 17 at this point." She denied knowing that Epstein kept sex toys in his house, and she denied knowledge that Epstein had sex with anyone other than herself and 2 women whom she and Epstein had group encounters with. She said, "I wasn't aware that he was having sexual activities with anyone when I was with him other than myself." She also testified that she had never given anyone a massage, including Epstein. Witnesses testified at the trial in excruciating detail about their abuse, and the jury believed them, convicting Maxwell of participating in sex trafficking of minors. But Maxwell was not convicted of perjury because before the trial, Judge Allison Nathan agreed to bifurcate the case. So she hived off the perjury charges for a second trial because evidence that Maxwell was a liar could have prejudiced the jury on the other charges. But after she was convicted on the more serious charge, prosecutors decided not to pursue the perjury counts in light of the victim's significant interest in bringing closure to this matter and avoiding the trauma of testifying again. All of which is to say that Maxwell is a totally unreliable witness. In 2020, the government pointed to Maxwell's willingness to brazenly lie under oath about her conduct, including some of the conduct charged in the indictment, strongly suggesting her true motive has been and remains to avoid being held accountable for her crimes. In her sentencing memo, the government said that Maxwell decides when she wishes to disclose facts to the court, and those facts shift when it serves the defendant's interests. And while she has information about Epstein's crimes, she also has a huge motive to lie about her own conduct and that of other co-conspirators, particularly when the person asking the question has a magic pardon key that could get her out of jail tomorrow. On July 22nd, Todd Blanche tweeted, "Justice demands courage. For the first time, the Department of Justice is reaching out to Ghislaine Maxwell to ask, 'What do you know?'" He wasn't meeting with the victims to hear their stories. Instead, he was heading to a prison in Tallahassee to meet with a woman who showed an utter lack of remorse instead of showing even a hint of acceptance of responsibility. The defendant makes desperate attempt to cast blame wherever she can. Those are the government's own words just 3 years ago. But on July 24th and 25th, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche met with Maxwell for 9 hours. Maxwell's attorney David Marcus reported that she answered all the questions without invoking privilege or refusing to respond. He emphasized that there has been no ask and no promise from the DOJ, nor any discussion of clemency or sentencing relief. Maxwell wasn't willing to say anything when Epstein was alive, but now she's apparently given up 100 names. Does anyone really think that Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche are pressing Maxwell to say what she knows about Donald Trump? To be frank, the whole thing reeks to high heaven. Nothing that Blanche has done here is normal protocol for eliciting testimony from a convicted felon. Here's how it's supposed to go. First of all, having the number 2 guy at the DOJ do a jailhouse interview is wildly abnormal. That is miles below Blanche's pay grade, and it's a screaming klaxon signal that this is a political operation, not a legal one.
Second, when prosecutors deal with someone known to be a prolific liar, verifying the truthfulness of anything that person says is a serious challenge. It is not as simple as flipping through the files on the plane down to Florida. These cases involved hundreds of witnesses and millions of pages of documents. Evaluating Maxwell's credibility requires a deep working knowledge of the entire case. Otherwise, how are you going to know if something she says conflicts with the record? And that's not something Blanche has. But there is someone who does have that granular knowledge. Her name's Maureen Comey, and she was the lead prosecutor on both the Epstein and Maxwell cases. But the DOJ just fired her a couple weeks ago, maybe because of her last name. Trump's still spinning tales about a conspiracy led by her dad, James Comey, the former director of the FBI. I mean, maybe there's another reason she got the boot, just as all this stuff about Epstein is kicking up again. In any event, no experienced prosecutor would ever conduct a high-stakes interview like this without another witness present, usually a law enforcement officer. Because if the witness changes her story later, someone needs to be able to testify about what was actually said. Typically, the government will enter into a written agreement with the prisoner to reduce her prison sentence in exchange for testimony or information. If it later turns out that that testimony was false, the government can go into court and formally move to revoke the deal. But in order to do that, you have to have the transcript or an impartial witness, and that cannot be the lawyer himself. But according to news reports, the only other people present were Maxwell's lawyers. And if they took notes at all, those notes are protected attorney work product. That is not admissible in court. So if Blanche is doing this in a way that ensures there's no written record, one of two things may be happening. Either the government does not intend to put a formal deal out there, so there's no need to develop a record, or the other alternative is that they do intend to reduce this thing to writing, and they're just really bad at it and won't have any recourse if Maxwell lies, or I guess it could be both. In 2023, Todd Blanche left his very prestigious job at a white shoe law firm to set up his own shop. He had one client, and that was Donald Trump. He is now Deputy Attorney General, effectively running the entire Justice Department. His first lieutenant, Emile Beauvais, worked with him to defend Trump in his personal criminal cases. His boss, Attorney General Pam Bondi, represented Trump in his first impeachment. And we're not saying Blanche was down in Florida to make a deal with a child sex trafficker to protect his client. But if he were doing that, here's how that might go down. One possible route is through what's known as a Rule 35B motion. Under that provision of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, prosecutors can ask a court to reduce a defendant's sentence if the person provides substantial assistance in the investigation or prosecution of others after being sentenced. But Rule 35B1 only allows the government to request a reduced sentence within a year of the defendant's sentencing, and that deadline is already in the rearview mirror. Rule 35B2 provides an exception after the 1-year mark, but only if some specific conditions are met. To qualify, Maxwell would need to offer new information that either she didn't know until more than a year after sentencing, or she knew earlier but didn't become useful to the government until later, or information she could not have known was useful until later, and she promptly gave it to the government once she realized it was. There is nothing Maxwell knows today that she did not know 3 years ago. She has had information that will be critical to cases against Epstein and his associates for decades, information that prosecutors definitely wanted. Maxwell could have negotiated a better deal for herself if she provided it, and she chose not to. Instead, she chose perjury and she chose to go to trial. So Rule 35 should not be an option here. The most likely scenario is that Donald Trump will pardon or commute Maxwell's sentence. And Trump's allies in conservative media are already working to shift the narrative to frame Maxwell as a victim. While Blanche was meeting with Maxwell, Trump seemed optimistic.
Todd Blanche is a great gentleman. He's a great man who's a great lawyer. He's got a great heart, but he's over there now.
Can you trust what she's telling him? She's a convicted trafficker who's eager to get out of prison.
Well, you know, he's a professional lawyer. I think he's been through things like this before.
Trump has said repeatedly that he has the right to pardon Maxwell, which is true, although the pardon power is supposed to be a solemn exercise of his official duty, not just a perk of the job like free Gatorade in the break room. But presidential prerogatives aside, springing a sex trafficker from jail would be politically explosive. Trump's connections to Epstein are well documented, and a pardon or commutation would trigger a public firestorm, especially among the victims. Obviously, Trump and his allies would frame the move as necessary to hold other perpetrators accountable. His media mouthpieces are already laying the groundwork for that. But there's no guarantee that the public would see it as anything other than a quid pro quo. Remember, when Trump was asked about Maxwell in 2020, he said, "I wish her well." Maybe Blanche could convince Maxwell to give Trump dirt on prominent Democrats in exchange for the promise of a future pardon. You know, just give up Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Adam Schiff, and Trump will do for you what he did for Steve Bannon and Jeanine Pirro's husband and Jared Kushner's daddy. What, am I the only one who remembers that he pardoned all those crooks on the way out the door last time? Pardoning Maxwell to protect the president would be an absurd abuse of executive power, but guess what? That's legal thanks to the Supreme Court ruling that the president can never be prosecuted for anything that falls inside his official duties. And they made sure to say in that opinion that they were definitely including pardons in that category. I mean, it's not legal for Todd Blanche to trade a pardon for dirt on Dems, but luckily he knows a guy who can pardon it. Meanwhile, Maxwell is still appealing her conviction. She has never accepted responsibility for the devastating harm she inflicted on these young girls, two of whom later died by suicide. In fact, her petition for certiorari to the Supreme Court attempts to avail herself of the protections extended to the victims in the 2008 non-prosecution agreement. Prosecutors reportedly added a clause granting immunity for co-conspirators to shield girls who were groomed by Maxwell and Epstein and then brought their friends in to perpetuate the cycle of abuse. But Maxwell argues that she, too, is entitled to immunity under this provision. On July 14th, the Justice Department filed a brief urging the court not to take the appeal, although it seems that the DOJ had to think real hard about that one. It asked for multiple delays before grudgingly asking the court not to hear Maxwell's petition. Outside the courtroom, Congress has also taken a renewed interest in Maxwell. On July 24th, the House Oversight Committee voted to subpoena Maxwell for testimony. Representative Tim Burchett, a Tennessee Republican, suggested that Maxwell might be able to reduce her sentence by testifying to Congress. At least, I think that's what he's saying.
Because the one thing we got holding over her head is if we find out she lies, she goes back to her original sentence. And that's looking at lifetime. And if she's looking at maybe parlaying this into reducing her sentence, then we could have some leverage there.
Congress doesn't have any control over Maxwell's sentence, but if you're trying to make it sound like this is politics rather than justice for the victims, well, again, not sure what you would do differently. Democrats are screaming bloody murder about the apparent quid pro quo being cooked up at the DOJ. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse questioned whether Blanche was effectively operating as Trump's private lawyer. Is he really going as Deputy Attorney General, or is he going de facto as Trump's personal criminal attorney, Tom Hagen style?
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
Did Todd Blanche take a horse's head into the jail when he met with Maxwell? Well, we don't know, because there was no independent party there to witness it. I mean, Pam Bondi has fired a lot of lawyers for failing to zealously represent their clients, and by their client, she means Donald Trump. On that, she's been entirely clear. She even called the DOJ his lawyers. And you know what they say? If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a nakedly corrupt quid pro quo being negotiated right in our faces while the real victims are ignored again. Maxwell's meeting with Blanche was under proffer immunity, which protects her statements in that interview from being used in criminal proceedings unless she lied. According to her attorney, Maxwell was asked about roughly 100 individuals involved in Epstein's network and answered all questions. Prosecutors have yet to clarify whether that immunity extends beyond the DOJ interviews. Meanwhile, we're finally hearing from Maxwell's lawyer about what she wants, and unsurprisingly, she wants a lot. In a letter to the House Oversight Committee, Marcus said, "As you know, Ms. Maxwell is actively pursuing post-conviction relief, both in a pending petition before the U.S. Supreme Court and in a forthcoming habeas petition. Any testimony she provides now could compromise her constitutional rights, prejudice her legal claims, and potentially taint a future jury pool." Her legal team demanded formal immunity from prosecution, a deposition conducted outside her Florida prison, advance access to all committee questions, and a delay in testimony until after resolution of her pending appeals, including the one before the Supreme Court. Without those assurances, Maxwell's attorney said she would invoke her Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. The House Oversight Committee has already subpoenaed Maxwell for a deposition scheduled the week of August 11th, but committee officials have signaled that they will not grant immunity, which is a central condition of Maxwell's cooperation. Maxwell's legal team emphasizes that progressing with the deposition without her protections would imperil her rights and potentially bias future criminal proceedings, which, yeah, no kidding. Of course she'd prefer to say whatever she needs to say privately to Blanche and get that sweet Trump pardon and then ride off into the sunset. If she gives a deposition, it opens the door to additional prosecutions. And she also does not want to deal with prosecutors that would require her to cooperate with law enforcement and then testify at a bunch of criminal trials as part of an immunity deal. She also doesn't want to face a bunch of righteously angry Democratic and Republican politicians questioning her about all the crimes she committed against children. And it would be nearly impossible for her to give testimony without opening the door to all sorts of questions that would criminally implicate herself and other people. So, think about it. If she names names, lawmakers are going to want to know all the details. They're going to demand to know what she told Blanche, and they're going to probe what other evidence possibly exists to verify her claims. And she can't get into all that without creating a much bigger problem for herself and possibly for Trump.
Now, all this highlights why it's so important to get a great lawyer when you're dealing with your own case. Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems. And they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? How do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel: transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front and your lawyers only get paid if you do, to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem. I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury. Because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you, or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers. A national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just whoever happens to be available. So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a social security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.